Welcome to Demystify Magic with Molly and Madison.
I'm Molly, a former skeptic turned full-time energy healer and teacher.
And I'm Madison, a born and raised witch running my family's crystal shop.
And we're here to explore all things woo through the lens of both science and spirituality so that you can find the moments of magic in your everyday life and create an intentional spiritual practice.
So if that's what you're into, find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's demystify some magic. Howdy doody, friends.
Howdy doody, friends.
We are gathered here today to celebrate a beautiful union. Not really. I just thought I sounded like a preacher for a moment. We have been digging in the archives of what you guys want to hear us talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And something that has come up over and over and over again that we have maybe put off a little bit has been the concept of shadow work. Yeah. And so we're going to look at our shadow today and see why we've been pushing off shadow work. And I know I usually have more for you.
Personally, I've been putting it off because I know when I see my shadow, it calls for 6 more weeks of winter.
Oh, I knew where you were going the second you opened your mouth. And I hate it and I love it.
I had to fill in the gap there.
I know there's a joke, but I can't suss it out.
The ground dog's name is Patuxa something, Phil.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, well, now you know.
Are you really into Groundhog's Day? Like, is that a...
No, but it's like the most pagan holiday in America.
For sure. I guess living in Florida...
Oh, you don't have winter.
There's no winter for me to like
celebrate it down there?
No.
We live and die by Phil.
That's the question I was asking. Is
it's like the entire week after. It's like because February is like it's dark, it's dreary, it's cold, and so everywhere you go, you're like, how's it going? Really tired of winter. And then depending on what the groundhog says, someone else will go, yeah, I'll get used to it. We got 6 more weeks. Or, yeah, but the groundhog didn't see his shadow. Should be spring soon. It's just like a remark you make at the grocery store. It's not like a religious belief.
Where I live, we might get 6 weeks total of winter. So I don't give a fuck what that groundhog says. Because it's probably already 75.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, I guess... it does feel very, like, witchy, though.
This is actually going to be a show. This is going to be an episode about famous shadows.
So, Reese Sand. In this corner, Shadow Daddy number 1. In this corner,
the groundhog.
Wait, okay. Fuck, marry, kill. Zayden. Resand, groundhog.
But you can't kill the groundhog. That has to be a rule. You can't kill the groundhog.
You can't.
Oh no. I fear that like the way that I've read these books recently, like I think that whoever I don't kill would change depending on what book I had read most recently. You know? Like I think I would have to marry the groundhog because
sure.
I don't want to fuck it. This is really the worst. I hate this.
Can you imagine stumbling upon this podcast? And just
I really
like...
and they were like, we're going to talk about shadow work and suddenly we're fuck, marry, kill and there's a groundhog involved. I hate it here. And then I would fuck Satan and I would have to kill Resand.
Yeah, I think that's probably how I would go too.
But I would feel really bad about it.
If you're listening on Spotify, let us know.
And if you kill the groundhog, just know you're cheating.
Yeah. You can't.
Because it's too easy if you kill the groundhog.
Yeah, you can't kill the groundhog.
But if you fuck the groundhog, don't tell me either. Anyway,
we're
Molly.
going to talk about shadow work.
But first, Molly, what was your magic moment this week? I can't believe anybody takes us seriously.
I know. I was like, oh, God, how is this podcast still on the air?
I don't know. I can't believe no one has, like, come for us.
I know. Patuxa something Phil is coming for us next time.
Every time you say his name, I think you're, like, having an aneurysm.
It's like,
I'm like, what are you starting to say?
Patuxatani.
Who
It's got
names
an
the
X in it.
groundhog?
I don't know.
I don't like his name. Anyways, tell me your magic moment.
My magic moment is I manifested a glass of water the other day. You know those days where you're just like going, and you forget it's like 3:00 and you're like, I haven't had a sip of water all day. And the moment you notice is the moment you become parched, like Sahara Desert parched. I had that moment. I was driving to my energy healer, and she lives an hour away from me. So the whole hour I was just with my dry mouth, just
ASMR.
searching my car, dry
mouth ASMR with Molly
for a lifesaver, for just a button that I could suckle on, anything. And I remember driving the whole way, and I was like, this is how you know I'm an anxious girly. I was like, I can't ask her for a cup of water. I get there.
I couldn't possibly.
I couldn't, no. And I was like, I don't have enough time to stop somewhere to get water. So I'm going to have to deal with this for the next 3 hours of my life. It's going to ruin the session.
There's no other option here.
Yeah.
Nothing to be done.
And I just kept kicking myself because the night before I cleaned all of my empty water bottles out of my car, or like my half empty water bottles. I cleaned them all out of my car. I was like being responsible. And I was like, I kept those for a reason. Anyways, I get to her house and I've succumbed to my fate. I was like, I'll just be thirsty for the next 3 hours. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I open my car door and I realize in the car door pocket is a cup of water that I got at the Dunkin' Donuts the day before.
Wow.
And there is about 12 ounces of water. And I was just like, the perfect amount of water. It was the perfect temperature because it had been in my car overnight.
Overday.
Overnight. And I drank that and I had an amazing session. And I had the perfect amount of water to get me through before the session and my ride home. It was
And you didn't even have to face your fears.
I know.
I thought this was going to be like you had a moment of courage and you like, or you saw like a water cooler with some cups.
Nope. I found an old Dunkin' Donuts cup in my car.
Excellent.
And I drank it.
No notes.
And it was one of those, I feel like a lot of my magic moments lately have been just like gratitude for water. I don't know if that's because we're in Pisces season now or what, but.
Or we're just not paying attention to our body's needs.
It was glorious.
I love that.
What was your magic moment? Everybody take a drink of water, you dehydrated besties.
Yeah, let's all take a moment of silence. Okay. First, I want to say thank you so much to everyone who sent me a message, extended a kind word after last week's episode. I promise I'm going to cool it with like being the source of heaviness on this podcast. I feel like my magic moments have been really heavy over like the last year, like with the hurricane stuff and, you know, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So
I forgot about the hurricane. That feels like a decade ago.
I know, right? You're telling me.
Jeez.
But so I like was being very intentional this week of like, you've got to find a good sappy magic moment. But I did just want to say thank you to everyone who reached out and shared how Linda has impacted their lives through the podcast, or like those of you who have gotten readings with her. I know that she like loved doing readings for people who listen to this podcast. So really appreciate it. But my magic moment is about her, but it is kind of silly because I had this moment with Anthony like right before Linda passed, where it was like in a moment of pure ego. I was like, what if I'm not psychic enough to see like when Linda comes to say hi? And I'm just here to say that I cannot believe that I ever thought that the most powerful person I ever knew could not be so fucking loud. Linda is the loudest ghost I've ever experienced in my life. She is so present. It's like she never left. And that has been like the magic that has carried me through this week, is like seeing her in all these like little different ways, both big and small, that has been really cool. I had a conversation with her where, because Linda knew, she willingly went into hospice care. And so the pragmatic person she is, she said, do you want me to haunt you? In our last conversation. And I said, no, I know that you'll be with me. Like, the haunting me is different. Like, you're going straight on the spirit team, but I want you to haunt the store. And that woman has haunted that fucking store. It's great.
She keeping that little boy in line?
Oh yeah, they are hanging out. I know they're just doing double dutch or something in there. I just feel it.
I love it.
It's been really great and really healing.
I love that. My favorite part about that is after you told me that story, I said, do we want to haunt each other? Should we talk about that now?
Yeah, should we lay those ground rules like now? Yeah. And I said, no. This is what I say to everyone. This is what I've been saying to everyone recently. I've said this to Anthony. I've said this to Drew. We are all gonna die like The Notebook. If you haven't seen The Notebook, spoiler alert, we are all gonna die in one big hospital bed together, hugging. So there will be no haunting needed. We're just all gonna go at the same time.
Yeah. Sure.
And I just need everyone to tell me that that's how it's gonna happen for like the next 6 months, and then I'll move past it.
I mean, it's kind of giving Jim Jones, but yeah, I mean, sure.
No, but like, it's like we're all gonna be, it's gonna be of old age, painlessly. Like, we're all just so interconnected that like our spirits will all leave at the same time.
Sure.
Just trust me on this. It's gonna be great.
Absolutely. For the next 6 months, I agree with you.
Thank you. I'm grieving.
I know.
Let me have this.
I know. Anyway.
Let's talk about shadow work.
A reminder, if you want to support the pod, demystifymagic.com has your hookup for the merch and may or may not soon have your hookup for A Court of Molly and Madison, our subscriber-only bonus podcast that you asked for.
If you were really enjoying the part where we were talking about the groundhog, do I have good news for you?
Strap in. Just to give you a little taste of what's coming, instead of sharing our magic moment of the week, we are sharing our most unhinged voice memos to each other. So
it's going to be a good time, I think.
So updates will be over there coming soon. But we may or may not be recording our first Akamom episode today. So it's happening. It's official. Happening. I've announced it.
We're bringing it out there. We can't believe this show's still on air. We're going to see if we can get away with 2. All right.
Shadow work.
Yeah. Shadow work is serious.
Okay. As serious as depicting the weather.
I hate it here.
It's giving meteorologist. I'm not doing shadow work. I'm a meteorologist.
Yeah. Get it right. I'm doing my own personal meteorology. So what is shadow work? Or like, what is the shadow? I kind of equate it to, what are the parts of yourself, 1, that you aren't super proud of, 2, that like come out in a form of, like, as a form of a trauma response, or the things that you kind of like keep hidden and sheltered from the world.
In the shadow.
In the shadow. It's standing behind the groundhog.
If you're not sure what that part of you is, I want you to think about a day where you've had it up to here and you haven't had lunch. What comes out of your mouth? What triggers you in that moment?
Yeah.
That is your shadow speaking.
How are you behaving? How are you lashing out?
Yeah. What is ticking you off?
Because we all do it. And I think like half the battle with shadow work is accepting and making peace with the fact that you have a shadow.
Yeah. I don't like this side of like the spiritual community that's like, you have to heal your shadow or like get rid of your shadow or turn like whatever. Like this idea that we need to like break away from our shadow. It's never going to happen.
Yeah. That's like the same as trying to break away from your physical shadow. That's why I actually really like the idea. Like I like that verbiage for it, of calling it the shadow, because it's the dark thing that is always going to be following you around. Yeah. And that's not to say that there aren't aspects of your shadow that you should work to heal. You know, it's not to like enable bad behavior, But there are always going to be days where you've had it up to here and you haven't had lunch, and you're going to
Yeah.
snap at someone. And I think that
What do you do about it?
exactly.
That's the work. That's the shadow work, is what are you going to do about it? Are you going to be pissed at yourself? Are you going to judge yourself? Are you going to think, I suck, I'm the worst, I'm not worthy of anything good? Or are you going to say, really needed lunch? And are you going to turn to yourself with compassion?
Yes.
I think shadow work in essence is like turning compassion towards the shadow.
And I think it's almost a form of integration. You know, you don't want to completely separate the shadow from you. You want to like give your shadow a hug and bring it into who you are. It is not separate from you. It is a piece of you that the more you try to push it out and say like, no, I'm leaving this behind. I'm like not going to do this anymore. I don't have a shadow anymore. The bigger it's going to be, and the more you're going to lean into that kind of behavior that you're maybe not super proud of.
Yeah.
It's like a rubber band. The farther you pull it apart, the harder it's going to hit when it snaps back.
Okay, that analogy is much better than the one I was about to come out with.
Tell me.
A really angry, pussy pimple. The more you try to cover it up with concealer, the crustier it becomes.
Oh, that's a good one too, though.
The more pussy it becomes, the more inflamed, the more itchy it becomes, versus just letting it breathe.
Yeah. And when you put a pimple patch on a pimple, you're not saying, oh, I'm never going to have a pimple again because I'm helping to heal this pimple. You're helping mitigate the damage that the pimple does to your face. And accepting that that's a part of life.
Yes.
So I like your pimple analogy.
Make peace with your pimples. Yeah, thank you. Make peace with your pimples.
Put that one on a t-shirt. Your spiritual pimples.
I also like to think of it in terms of, I know a lot of our listeners have resonated with our chakra series. If you haven't listened yet, go listen to the root episode. But we can see the shadow play out in the chakras, right? So the root is this home of feeling safe, feeling secure, feeling like I belong. It's this foundation. The shadow side of that is fear, is worry, right? Is that bad? No, because we need fear. We need worry. It's the reason you don't eat Tide Pods for lunch and walk in front of trains, right? It's the reason that you have a roof over your head. It's the reason that you feel safe and secure and you belong and that your basic needs are met. Without fear, without worry, those things wouldn't happen. We wouldn't be here. And so when we're working with the root and trying to come into a place of feeling that sense of security, we can't just push fear away. We can't push worry away. We have to understand, why is this coming up? Why is this pimple coming to the surface, right? Or if we look at the heart chakra, right? Home of grief and home of love. You can't grieve something unless you loved it. And so when we experience grief, we don't try to shut it out. We don't try to push it away. We don't try to send it underground. We accept it because it means that there's something or someone we truly deeply loved. And so that's how I like to look at the shadow, is kind of like looking at, you cannot have a shadow without light. And I think sometimes we get so stuck in the darkness of the shadow that we forget that it is created from light. And so I think part of shadow work is not abandoning the shadow and just bypassing it to look to the light, but instead like integrating and understanding both sides.
Yeah. And I think really like finding the balance of light and dark that exists in all of us. I think if we were all light and no dark, or all dark with no light, like that's out of the natural order of things, And so trying to push too hard in one direction, trying to like shine out the darkness that lives in you, it's not going to work and it's not going to feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're probably going to be an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those people are miserable to be around.
Yeah.
Truly. So shadow work is essentially doing that work of integration, finding compassion for that shadow side, understanding how your shadow presents itself, where it comes from, what triggers it, how it comes out, and how you can almost like give yourself a little bit more space around those just habitual reactions of the shadow so that you can respond more compassionately to yourself when it comes out.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that a lot of people say, oh, you've got to do your shadow work, you've got to do your shadow work, but I don't often hear people talking about what that work is. And so we compiled a short list of things that we do that we consider to be shadow work. I also want to say that there are lots of ways not on this list to extend that compassion to yourself. And so if you are listening to our description of what shadow work is and like what the purpose of it is, and you're like, oh, I find that through XYZ. I
Candy
find that
Crush.
through petting my dog, you know, whatever it is, that there's no like one-stop shop for what shadow work is. And so as long as it's something that you're working through, if you're making peace with your shadow, go on with your bad self.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone's like, do your shadow work. And then everyone in the comments is like, what does that mean? And then they're like, buy this journal, buy this course, buy this whatever. And it's like, no, you're actually probably doing shadow work and not even realizing it. So we're just going to call attention to that so that you don't get caught up in like the shadow work grifts that are all over social media.
Yeah. That being said, journaling is number one on our list.
Love journaling. You don't have to buy a specific shadow work journal though, unless you want to. You don't have to though.
If you want to, that's great. If you want just like one special place to keep all of your not so pleasant thoughts, I feel you. But yeah, you can use any old journal. You can use the notes app on your phone. The overarching theme that I think we're going to touch on mostly is like bringing attention to when the shadow is peeking out, when that version of ourselves that we're not obsessed with is showing its face, when we're operating from a place of a trauma response, when we're triggered.
Yeah.
What I like to do is whatever the thought is that's in my brain that I don't like, I'll write that like down as a sentence or however many sentences, and then I'll just write down how I feel about it. What does that make me think about myself? What does that make me think about others? What does that make me think about the world? Why do I think I'm feeling this way? Why do I think I'm having this thought? Who taught me to think like this?
Yeah.
Things like that. And that is a structure that I find really works for me, because when I put the thought on paper or the action on paper or the feeling on paper, it almost for me acts as like a way to zoom out and see things from a little bit of a bird's eye view.
Totally. That's so interesting because as you're talking, I was like, wow, we approach these at two very different angles. Like yours is very like reactive. Like I have a thought, what am I going to do about it? But mine is very like the opposite. Like I don't want to say proactive, but like it kind of is like ahead of time, because a lot of my shadow work, instead of being around thoughts I'm having or reactions I'm having, it's about where I'm not reacting. When I meet obstacles and I can't take action, when I'm like, oh, I'm like stuck in the mud. And a lot of times I used to think that this was my ADHD, right? Executive dysfunction obviously like does affect our ability to motivate ourselves. But what I found is through just understanding my shadow more and more, like my executive dysfunction and my anxiety go hand in hand. And so sometimes I'm like spinning my wheels on not creating a thing because I'm scared of what people will think of it.
Yeah.
And so what I like to do is when I find I'm spinning my wheels and I'm not doing a thing, or I'm not doing something that I know I want to do, I write down like why? What is the thought behind that? What is the fear? Because ultimately it's like, I think the shadow is like fueled by fear in a way. All of your wiring is. If you've listened to this pod for any amount of time, you know that your brain is wired to survival. And so everything that it does is to keep you alive. And so underneath that not taking action is some kind of fear. And I like to journal on what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen? Okay, I'm scared to make this video for Instagram because I'm scared of getting canceled. Okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? 1 million people drag me and they put me on the news and I'm on those like spill sesh YouTube channels that I am subscribed to that I will never be able to watch again, and people hate me and blah, blah, blah. Okay, what's the worst that can happen from there? And then like literally flesh it out to like, oh, I guess like I'm not in immediate danger. And sometimes I dump all that out of my brain, and then I take that like 50-foot view of it, like you were saying, and I zoom out and I go, how likely is this to happen? Like what would I realistically do if this path started to open up? It's like, oh, obviously I would like take the video down and like apologize before it got to that point. Okay. And then all of a sudden like the fear doesn't have that grip on me and I can take that action.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting that's like that our shadows show up for us in such different places, because I feel it so heavily in the ways that I do act, in the things that I do, and the things that I say, and the choices that I make. And it's something that like Drew and I honestly have done a lot in our relationship, where like we don't say, oh, this was my shadow, because that's a little dramatic.
That's Phil.
I am going to do that from now on.
You should.
Calling attention, like after something happens, turning and saying like, oh, that wasn't all me. Like it was me. It wasn't all the me that I want to be.
Yeah.
And talking it out. I think talking about it is really the most shadow work that I do. We're going to talk about therapy a little bit later. That is my biggest type of shadow work. And I see that kind of pattern show up for me, because it really is like I talk about shit with you all the time. You listen to me psychoanalyze my own behavior as much, if not more, than my therapist does. Yeah. And that is my form of shadow work.
Yeah. We're both verbal processors.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. That's why we have a podcast.
I was going to say, that's what this podcast is, one big verbal process.
But yeah, love journaling. You could, if you're someone who likes to go by prompts, you could just Google shadow work prompts. I mean, I honestly, like, I wish I could give you a book recommendation or a journal recommendation, but this is my soapbox. I have read so many books about the shadow. I have read so many shadow work journals, and they're all fucking garbage.
I have one coming to the store. I'm trying it out. Oh, I ordered it the other day.
Send it to me.
I'll keep you updated. I'll let you know.
Please.
Hope it's good.
I read one shadow work book that literally, it was like, I wrote a lengthy review on it. Like a lengthy review, because it was just like, it was fat phobic, and it was like extremely in like gender roles, and it was just awful. And I was like, this person needs to do some shadow work before they publish a book.
Yeah.
And that might be my shadow coming out, but I just don't like a lot of the shadow work options on the market. So if you have a shadow work journal or book that you like, please send us the recs, because I am in the wrong side of that algorithm.
I'll let you know when mine comes in the mail.
I can't wait. Our next one is meditation.
If I had $1 for every time that was on one of our lists.
I know. This and the next one. I think meditation is a really powerful form of shadow work, because, like we said, part of the biggest piece of shadow work is just becoming aware of that shadow, and meditation builds awareness. It also helps you separate from your reactions. Like it the way that I see it is like, my shadow tends to come out when I'm really, really overwhelmed or when I'm hungry. And meditation helps me see that. It helps me see like, oh, okay, I'm like extremely overwhelmed right now. Maybe I should sleep on this. Or I'm actually really hungry. I need you not to talk to me.
Yeah.
You know? Whereas like without meditation, I can just cut up and I can just be like a fucking Godzilla running through the Costco. When all I need is like a little cinnamon churro, and then I'm golden.
And everything's fine.
Everything's fine. But it's hard to see that when you're right up against it. I think meditation just gives you a little bit more space to start to see like, who am I? Like, which of these reactions are actually mine, and which of these reactions are like genuinely reactions to experiences, past traumas, our hunger levels, all of that.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're not a verbal processor, this is
Mm-hmm.
something that is a really great way for you to create space to process internally.
Yeah.
Setting
Yeah.
aside 10-15 minutes to let those thoughts pass by like clouds or whatever they say on the apps that we talked about, how I don't like that as
Like the
much.
Macy's Day Thanksgiving parade floats.
Yes. Let those floats fly by and give
Mm-hmm.
yourself space to process where they're coming from.
Yeah. I also think too, like a lot of times, like you said, sometimes just writing it down is all you need to kind of step away from it. And I think a lot of times it's because we're so busy, we don't have time to metabolize our thoughts. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's like some research, I don't know how they do this research, but it's like 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day is like what the average person has.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those do you actually keep track of? And the majority of those thoughts are negative, and the majority of those thoughts are the same thoughts you had yesterday and the day before 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 that.
Isn't it so weird that like 95% of what we do and think and say, like we don't remember?
Yeah.
I think about that
I know.
all the time. I'm like, I had 80,000 thoughts yesterday and I don't know what they were.
Not a single one.
Not a single
Yep.
one. They're all just
Yeah.
forgotten, lost to time.
I know. And so really like you're at the mercy of your thoughts all day
Mhm.
long. And so if you have that part of your brain that is scared to do something or is reacting based on fear or based on whatever the case may be in your shadow, you have no control over that ride. It's
Mhm.
like I always love the analogy of meditation's a lot like riding a horse. You're not trying to get off the horse being your thoughts. It's more so you want to be able to hold the reins so
Yeah.
that you can decide the pace, so that you can decide the direction, because ultimately you don't need to go to every thought that you're invited to. And so meditation is a really powerful way to create that space so you can make those decisions. Reminder, if you hate meditation, I do have a free 7-day meditation challenge specifically for you. The person with the brain that won't shut the hell up, can't sit still, who doesn't have time in their busy day. We'll link it in the show notes. Give me 7 days. I promise you will find a meditation you like.
You can do it.
Yeah. Next.
Another one we're going to talk about till the day we die, Reiki.
Reiki.
I love Reiki as a tool for that integration of the shadow self and like the forward facing self. When we talk about healing the shadow, this is what I really mean is I see Reiki as like almost like an olive branch to the version of myself that I am not obsessed with. The version of myself that maybe is a little feral.
Mm-hmm.
And through Reiki, I, first of all, create the space to sit with her.
Mm-hmm.
I give her a seat at the table. I'm like inviting her to be close to me.
Mm-hmm.
And because when we use Reiki to heal others, we heal ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That energy has to flow through us to flow to them, for them to use it to heal themselves. And I'm talking about my shadow as if she's like a separate version for me, because that is how my brain kind of sees it.
Mm-hmm.
And through Reiki, we kind of meld together into the whole complete person, because in the same way that you are not just your bad thoughts, you are not just your unkind actions, you're not just your good thoughts, and you're not just the kind things that you do. You are a mix of all of the beautiful, wonderful, and frustrating and aggravating parts of yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so Reiki for me is just how I kind of bridge that gap and can see that Madison with the same love and understanding and compassion that I have for the person of me that like forward faces, that sees the rest of the world all the time.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I think one of my favorite shadow worky type practices in like the Reiki kind of realm is something I teach my level 2 students when we dabble in distance Reiki, and it's called Reiki for situations. And it's basically, everything, every reaction you have today is based on who you were yesterday. right? Our brain is always learning and creating neural pathways based on our experiences and our beliefs and so forth. But in this case, experiences. So say I have this fear of putting myself out there. Okay, where did that come from? Where's that fear of being seen come from? Is it because I got laughed at in 4th grade when I went up on stage? Is it because I choked in a acceptance speech for like a participation trophy in middle school? Like there was some event in your past that is almost like the pimple under the surface. If we're continuing with that analogy, that clogged pore.
If we're still using the skincare model.
And so Reiki for situations is when we go into that past situation, we call it up, and we don't change the past, but we change our relationship to it. So we start to look at it through this lens of a regulated nervous system, which we experience with Reiki. We start to see all sides of it because we sit with it and we zoom out from that, tunnel vision that we had in the moment, and we see the other players involved, and we see the situation on a broader sense. And it's almost like, if we're following the skincare analogy, we're applying like a balm to that pimple. So when we come out of Reiki for situations and we go into another moment in time that in the past would have triggered us, we remember that association of the balm, and we have this sense of ease alongside our memory of that trigger. So there's this really cool thing that your brain does, not to geek out, but that's why you're here. Your brain will basically call up memories with the emotional state that they're associated with. So if you have that memory of you in middle school choking on your acceptance speech and people laughing at you and feeling like, oh my God, I'm such a failure, well, I can never get on stage again, then every time you recall that memory, that emotion comes back with it. It's like they're filed together in the filing system of your brain. And then when something similar comes up, say you have to get on stage and present something at work, your brain pulls that file, that memory comes, that association, that emotion comes with it. And so when we send Reiki to that memory, we build a new emotional association. One of peace, one of calm, one of ease, one of I've got this. Just for this breath, I'm not going to worry about it. Just for this breath, I'm going to remember I'm safe. Just for this breath, my feet are on the floor. And then your brain files that association with the memory. So when you go to do that work presentation, instead of pulling the file where you are freaked out because you choked, on your acceptance speech, it pulls that with the Reiki file. And so you can call up that emotional state of peace with it. And so it's one of the ways that we can almost like become more familiar with the root cause of what triggers us, and then also apply a balm so that when we create new memories that potentially could trigger us, they don't ingrain that association or that pattern deeper. They actually bring us out of that pattern and create new associations.
And this is how I'm going to seamlessly transition us into therapy, because what you're talking about is so the specific type of therapy that I do coded. So I go to a therapist who specializes in internal family systems therapy, which
IFS
I fucking love. And it basically is that without the Reiki. It's a little bit more of like a meditation, and like that's something that I kind of incorporate on my own time. But it's the idea is that there are parts of us that exist inside us that basically stayed in those moments. So like at that middle school participation trophy acceptance speech flounder, that middle school girl is still inside, afraid,
feeling her feelings. Yeah,
feeling her feelings. And so to me, the shadow integrates with that really well, because there's a little bit of shadow in all of those parts, right? And so highly recommend that type of therapy, but any and all kinds of therapy can be shadow work. Therapy is like the original shadow work.
The OG. Yeah.
But if you feel like traditional talk therapy hasn't worked well for you in the past, I really highly recommend IFS.
Yeah.
It's, to me, the most woo of like more traditional clinical types of therapy that I've experienced. And it literally is like meditating, and it's so spiritual in nature. And so it's really easy in my experience to find someone who is down with the witchy shit who does IFS.
Have I ever told you my IFS experience?
No.
Oh, my therapist that I saw a couple years ago did IFS with me. And she's like, I think you're really going to love it. It's like right up your alley. I hated it the first couple of
Really?
sessions. I was like, this is bullshit. And then I realized, oh, that's my skeptic part.
Mm-hmm.
That little skeptic version of Molly still existed in me.
Yes.
And I was like, when she pointed that out, she was like, what is that part protecting you from? And I was like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what?
That's what it is that's where the compassion really comes into play.
Yeah.
Is
because it was showing up.
all of your parts are just trying to protect you.
Yeah. And it was showing up in all these different ways. It was like, this was before we started the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, it was showing up in like, not really going deep into the nuance of the woo, or like not calling myself a witch, or like not doing this, not doing that. Like, it was showing up in ways that I was like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, no wonder I'm afraid to have a reel go viral.
Yeah.
That's like kind of woo.
Mm-hmm.
Because my skeptic part is like, what are you doing?
Yeah, that can possibly be real.
Yeah. And then I made peace with that part, and I was like, fuck it, let's start a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild. It's wild. So I give that to you because if you have resistance to doing it, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I totally get it. Be honest with your therapist about that resistance.
Yeah.
I literally said to her, I was like, I understand you're trying to help me, but there's a part of me that feels like this is bullshit. And she's like, so you recognize there's a part of you. And I was like, oh,
and
ma'am.
even like how we talk is so, it's just so great. I really love.
Yeah, it's very cool. And it does feel like energy work to me. Like it feels very similar.
Yeah.
It's wild because it's like my body feels like I received an energy clearing at the end of a session.
Yeah. It
Wild.
is, for me, especially like, I need some like action in therapy, if that makes sense. I can't just talk. I can't just journal. I can't just meditate. Like I need something that's like, I need to be quote unquote doing something.
Yeah. I need immediate results.
Yeah. Oh, kind of. Honestly.
Yeah. I need instant gratification.
It's like, I don't know. For me, therapy works best when it's like an active, when it's like a contact sport,
Yeah.
Because I can talk about shit that happened all day long. I can yap, as we've come to know together over the last year and a half of this podcast. But if you feel similarly, if you feel like talk therapy doesn't give you like the same level, if you feel like you're just talking about things and then leaving, you feel like you're doing something in that kind of therapy. This podcast is not sponsored by IFS therapy, but if they wanted to talk.
IFS I did it in combination with EMDR, and that was like a really intense experience.
Yeah. I'm starting EMDR soon.
Hey, all right. EMDR
therapist.
podcast coming soon.
Coming to a podcast near you. I'll let you guys know.
And finally on our list is somatic bodywork stuff is what we wrote down.
Great. I love when we're really specific.
I know. But seriously, like working with the body is so powerful. If you are new here to the podcast, I highly recommend going back and listening to our root chakra episode because that really builds the foundation for what we're going to talk about. But in essence, all of your emotional experiences are stored in your physical body. Like think about when you experience anxiety, that squeeze in your stomach, the breath going up into your chest, right? Your body is built like a muscle. So all of your bones and your tissues and your muscles all grow in a way that make that pattern of emotional holding easier. And so sometimes when we only focus on the mental or the emotional side of shadow work, we can still feel kind of stuck because that emotion and that energy is lingering in the body. So combining whatever you're doing mentally, emotionally, energetically with some sort of body work release can be really helpful. And this could be, stretching. This could be rolling on a tennis ball. This could be getting a massage, getting myofascial release, going to a yoga class. Like it could be big or small, but we wanted to add it in here to remind you not to neglect the physical body and the physical tissues, which are also storing those emotional patterns.
Can I tell you what's been happening to me recently?
Please.
For the last few months, I have been leaving my Pilates class, getting in my car, and sobbing.
Oh.
And it's like I know about like myofascial release and things like that. Like I know about that kind of body work, right? But I didn't realize that it could happen through like a more quote unquote traditional exercise. But the way, I think it's because a lot of it requires a lot of hip mobility. And there's like a lot of focus on the hips and kind of like where the hips are sitting, and like, I don't know, we're doing a lot of lunges. I feel like those are very opening to my hips.
Oh yeah. For sure.
And I just get in, sometimes I cry in the middle of class. And I'm like, thank God it's so dark in here.
Yeah.
Thank God I always go to the back corner of the room and nobody ever takes the machine next to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild, right? It's wild when that happens. I've had moments where in the middle of a yoga class, I'm like, fuck this.
Yeah.
Like, just anger. The way that I describe it to my students is a lot like farting underwater. Just let it bubble up and release. Don't hold it in.
Yeah, for certainly. She waited till I took a sip of water to say that, just so everybody knows what kind of person and
but
friend
you've
she
heard
is.
me say it before.
I know, but I'm not always mid water sip.
That's true. Everybody take a sip of water.
Moment of silence.
Did we do it?
I think we did it.
I think we did it.
I love making this podcast with you.
I love making this podcast with you. I can't wait for our next one.
I know. You want to go record it?
Yeah.
Okay, love you guys. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Demystify Magic with Molly and Madison. If you want to learn more about us, you can find all our links in the show notes.
We'd love to know what you think of today's episode, so drop us a review or give us a shout out on social media. And don't forget to let us know your magical moment of the week. Okay, love you. Bye.